So let's go ahead and put in that timer so as that the I-beam is shut off after a certain amount of time, and a bunch of ways this can be done. Let's put in a float called total time. Let's set it to 0 to begin with. Put in our brackets. Let's also put in a variable that lets us know that the I-beams are actually active. Defaults to no because it's not on to begin with. So I-beams active equals yes. Okay, so if the space button is hit, it becomes visible. I-beams active become yes, and in the update section, we'll now check for if that variable is set to yes. Well, why, but obviously it means yes. So time.delta time, if you haven't seen that yet, basically what you're saying is how much time has passed since the last time time.delta time has been encountered. Delta, if you remember from math class, is change. The change in something. Well, it's a changing time. So total time equals time.delta time. Oops, plus equals. That way it's added to the total. And now what we'll do is we'll put in another one. If total time is greater than 0.25, I'm going to do a couple of things. So we need the brackets here. But like I said, best practice is really to always put in the brackets. So we'll set total time back to 0. That way it's ready for the next time the I-beams get activated. And what else are we going to do? We are going to set the I-beams back to 0. And I forgot somewhere double equals sign right there. Oh, pretty straightforward. We'll have to see about timing the I-beam so it's not a rapid fire. So either there's a secondary timer that prevents you from spamming it, or there will be a limitation to how much you can use. There'll be a recharge for it. So let's go ahead and create our terrain now. So let's take the mound asset and we'll copy that, paste it, and we will flip it 180 degrees. That way it's a mirror image. That way it lines up seamlessly. And as fate would have it, an even 4 spaces lines it up nice and neat. So we now make the second one a child of the first one. Oops. And now we can move these around. Okay, let's give it a rigid body, 2D. And let's add a script. Let's go into that script. And what we're going to do is at the start we want this object to have velocity to it. So it's moving right to left, so let's make it a -3. It's not going to change its height, and it's not changing the depth in the screen either. So that's the first thing we do. Next, we create a, well, let's actually turn this into a prefab. Delete the original, and now we're going to create a new object. This one's going to be the GM object, so it's going to handle creating of the environments, things like that. So it too needs a script. Let's go into that. And in this, in the start, we want to instantiate that prefab. Now, objects aren't aware of each other until you make them aware, and you do that through various means such as creating a variable and then attaching it. So like how we attach the I-beams to the player by creating that variable and then dragging and dropping it onto it. Same thing here. So public transform ground. Save that. Come here to the GM object. And there it is, ground. So make sure you grab the prefab and not just the image file. And this is going to be kind of sloppy, but this is just to demonstrate how it works. We can always clean the code up later. So instantiate ground, now that GM is aware of it, at -4, comma, oops, sorry, new vector 3, -4, comma, Now, it's better to use a, oops, we have to put in the rotation as well. Okay, so it's better to use a loop, but just so you get the feel for how this works, we're going to instantiate the ground a whole bunch of times, and that creates the terrain. And since the ground already has velocity built right into it, all you have to do is keep these the same distance apart. I said one object takes up 4 spots. The prefab is made out of 2, so we need to shift by 2. And as I said, this really isn't the best way to do it. This is a lot of redundant instantiate commands, whereas you should just use a loop that uses the same command and cycles through this x coordinate, but you'll get the feel for it. Oops, I forgot to get rid of the gravity. There we go. Just like that, we have scroll and terrain. Now, it won't last very long because there's only a few of them. Actually, it looks like there's a tiny bit of a seam. Just change its size so it's slightly bigger. That looks like that took care of it. Not quite as seamless as I hoped, but you get the idea. Now let's start adding some enemies. So we're going to take our meteor image, drag and drop it here. We're going to make some changes to it, and then it too will become a prefab. So let's give it a rigid body, give it a fixed angle, and we will give it a polygon collider. And what we're going to do is we will also give a script controlling it. Similar to the terrain, that in the start section we want to give it its velocity. Now technically you could be doing this from the GM script, because the GM object gets made aware of all these objects. So technically you could have the GM do it, and that would avoid the necessity of these individual scripts. Your choice. You could either have the I like the control of an object to be attached to it, but you could indeed have the GM object, since it's made aware, since it has ground, you could actually do ground dot get component and change the velocity that way if you wanted to. So in other words, basically this get component statement you would move to the GM script. This one will be moving in two different directions. So -2 because it's moving right to left, but it's also moving down. Oops. Now we'll just run that to see it working. Oops, what happened? Oh. Bit slow. So let's make that. I'm not really going as much of an angle as I'd like either. That's better. Now we take that, drop it down here to make it a prefab, delete the original, go to the GM script, and now we make the GM object aware of the meteor. Save. Go to GM. Again, make sure you're grabbing the prefab. And now what we're going to do next is we will have the GM instantiate a bunch of meteors. So just as it instantiated the mounds for the terrain, it will also be instantiating the meteors, which will be the first enemy that you have to fight. In this case, you will be shooting them before they strike the ground.